Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are cracking open a book that, a lot of people talk about, but maybe fewer have really dug into.
A really big one.
F.A. Hayek's 1944 treatise, The Road to Serfdom. And our mission isn't just a book report. We want to really understand the mechanism he laid out.
Right. The how. How does this happen?
Exactly. How does the pursuit of centralized economic planning, even when it's driven by the best intentions, somehow tend to, dismantle freedom and lead towards servitude?
And you have to start with the context. I mean, this book wasn't written in a quiet university office thinking about abstract theory.
No, not at all.
Hayek was writing this right in the middle of World War II, and he was genuinely panicked.
That 1944 context it's everything, isn't it?
It is. Britain and the Allies had, out of necessity, adopted these massive economic controls.
You're talking about rationing, price fixing, command and control for all the resources.
The whole economy was basically one giant, centrally planned machine to win the war.
Which was necessary.
Absolutely necessary. Hayek's fear wasn't about the war effort. It was about the idea of the permanent extension of these temporary wartime measures into peacetime.
Ah, I see.
He was seeing this growing enthusiasm, especially among intellectuals and politicians, to use these exact same tools, the central planning, the controls, to achieve post-war goals.
Things like social justice or economic security.
Exactly. And his core thesis, for the time, was a complete intellectual bombshell. It challenged everything people thought they knew.
He was arguing that totalitarian systems like National Socialism in Germany and Soviet communism, they weren't just some kind of historical accident.
Or a reaction against liberal society.
Right. He claimed they were the necessary outcome of these collectivist tendencies.
He's basically saying, look at the methodology. The moment you replace the impersonal, decentralized forces of the market with a big macro social goal decided by a central authority.
You're on a path.
You're on a slippery, and he argued, an inevitable path. That pursuit of one single economic blueprint, he said, forces you, step by step, to destroy the rule of law and political freedom.
And this book, it wasn't just for academics. It was first published by Routledge and the University of Chicago Press, but it really blew up when a huge excerpt was printed in Reader's Digest in 1945.
Reached millions of people who would never touch a political economy text.
And that's what made it this critical warning. So that warning is our deep dive today. How do good intentions accidentally pave that road to tyranny? Okay, so Hayek's whole argument seems to hinge on this fundamental conflict. It's the difference between a system built on a spontaneous, self-generated rules and one built on a conscious central design.
That's the starting point.
So let's begin with that problem of centralized choice.
The challenge for any central planner is that they're immediately forced to decide what the common good actually is. I mean, in free society, we don't need to agree on what the ultimate good is.
Right. I want to buy books, you want to buy camera gear.
And the price system just coordinates our resources without anyone having to agree on which is better. We each get to judge our own needs.
But the moment you bring in a national economic plan, you're swapping millions of individual judgments for one single judgment.
You are. We could use what we might call the school lunch analogy.
Okay.
If a school lets every student pick their own lunch, pizza, salad, sandwich, whatever, based on their own taste and budget, that's spontaneous order.
Mm-hmm.
But if the school decides to implement the deep dive single school lunch plan for nutritional equality, suddenly a central authority has to decide a whole bunch of conflicting things.
Like, is protein more important than fiber? Should we spend all the money on organic ingredients, even if it means smaller portions?
Whose cultural tastes should we satisfy? The moment that collective action goes beyond, say, basic safety rules, the ability to find any kind of democratic agreement just shrinks dramatically.
Because you can't get everyone to agree on the one best lunch.
Exactly. And Hayek's point is that when central planning is comprehensive, it requires agreement on everything, which is just impossible in a real democracy.
So the whole political process just grinds to a halt.
It gets gridlocked.
Yeah.
He uses this great analogy of a group committing to a journey without agreeing on the destination.
I like that.
The planner points the bus north, and suddenly half the group realizes they desperately needed to go west. But they're already on the bus. They're committed to a journey most of them don't actually want.
And that inability to agree, that's what forces the planner to go from just facilitating society to actively directing it.
And this is where the concept of the rule of law becomes the first and biggest casualty.
Which he sees as the absolute pillar of a free society.
It is the central pillar. The rule of law, or Rechtsstaat, as it's known in the German tradition, just means that the government itself is bound by rules that are fixed and announced beforehand.
They're the predictable guardrails.
Exactly.
So why is that predictability so important for freedom?
Because it allows you, the individual, to make your own plans with some confidence. If you know the rules of the game are fixed, the tax rates, contract law, property rights, you can calculate your risks and rewards.
You know the government isn't just going to step in and arbitrarily change the rules just to mess up your specific plan or, help out your competitor.
Their coercive power has to be predictable.
Okay, let's break down this distinction he makes between formal rules and substantive rules. That feels really critical.
It's the hinge for the whole argument. A formal rule is general, it's instrumental, it applies to everyone, without any reference to specific people or specific time and place.
Like the rule of the road.
Perfect example. Everyone drives on the right, the speed limit is 70. The legislature makes that rule, but they have no idea how it's going to affect Dave versus Jane next Tuesday.
That lack of foresight about the specific effects, that's the key to making sure the lawmaker is impartial.
Yes. But when the state moves to substantive rules, which is what planning demands...
What happens then?
Then the state has to decide actual needs as they pop up. How much copper should go to the grid versus new phones this quarter? What's a fair price for milk in this specific town?
Decisions that depend entirely on the circumstances of the moment.
Right. You can't figure that out from a fixed formal principle. It requires continuous specific judgment calls.
Wait a minute, I'm sort of getting stuck on this impartiality point. Are you saying that a government deciding to, say, put a new hospital in a poor neighborhood is inherently bad, even if it helps a vulnerable population? Where does he draw that line?
That's a great question. Hayek draws the line exactly where the action stops being general and becomes specific to an individual situation.
Okay.
If the government uses a formal rule, like a general formula that gives funding based on population density and poverty scores, that's fine. The formula applies to all.
It's impartial.
But if the planning board says, we're building the hospital here, and to do it, we have to take Farmer Giles's land at a special low price, because his specific land is crucial to our plan.
Ah, okay. Then they're explicitly choosing whose interest to sacrifice for the collective goal.
Exactly. They stop being the referee who upholds the rules and become a player trying to score a goal. The second the government can foresee the exact effects of its actions on particular people, it's choosing between those people's ends.
It stops being what he called utilitarian machinery.
And becomes a moral institution.
Imposing its own values.
Yes. It imposes its view on all moral questions. What's important, what's marginal, whose needs come first. And that, for Hayek, is the end of impartiality. Once that's gone, the whole framework for individual liberty is destroyed.
So if you replace the market's spontaneous order with conscious planning, Hayek shows this chain reaction that starts to trigger coercion. This might be his most powerful point.
It's the idea of the slippery slope, but with a very clear mechanical logic behind it.
Right. That small, well-intentioned interventions actually force the planner into bigger, more arbitrary controls just to stop the first plan from collapsing. So let's trace that chain. The classic example is price controls.
So step one is information failure. The planner sets a goal, let's say universal affordable heating. They try to manage coal production and distribution, but they just don't have the real-time scattered information about demand or extraction costs or what substitutes are available.
Information the price system coordinates automatically.
Instantly and automatically. So the plan is based on assumptions that are basically out of date the second they're printed.
So that leads to step two, disruption and intervention. The planner tries to make heating cheap by fixing the price of coal way below what the market would set.
And this immediately distorts all the signals.
How so?
The low price tells producers, don't bother mining this, it's not profitable. And it tells consumers, use as much as you want, it's cheap.
That creates an obvious gap, a shortage.
A massive shortage. So now people are freezing, and the central goal of affordable heating is being thwarted by the very mechanism designed to achieve it.
And the planner can't just admit the price system works better, because that means abandoning the whole plan.
So they are forced to take the next, more coercive step. Step 3, secondary controls.
To manage the chaos they created.
To manage the chaos. Since the price can't do the job of rationing the limited supply, the planner has to do it administratively. They have to issue ration cards, special permits for factories, approvals for new furnaces.
You're replacing that flexible price signal with rigid, bureaucratic orders.
And now the planner is forced to make decisions based only on vague ideas like what's fair or reasonable. How much coal is reasonable for a family of 4? What about an elderly couple?
These are case-by-case arbitrary decisions.
Which is the core infringement of the rule of law. You're now balancing one person's specific need against another's with no general principle to guide you.
And that leads to the final step. Power concentrates.
This constant need for secondary intervention means you have to leave more and more decisions to the discretion of the authority.
Because they need to act fast.
They need to act instantly, based on the circumstances of the moment. So the person trying to get coal or a permit for a new business can't rely on a general rule anymore. They have to lobby the planner.
And the power just keeps flowing upwards.
It has to, because only the central authority has the big picture of the whole complex plan. Only they can decide whose resources must be sacrificed. The good intentions get trapped and can only be expressed through stronger and stronger commands.
So let's connect that concentration of power to politics, to planning, delegation, and the failure of democracy. Hayek argues democracy only really works when government functions are pretty limited.
Right. Democracy is great when you can get a majority consensus on broad, general rules like national defense.
But central planning forces a democratic body, like a parliament, to try and get agreement on everything.
On the location of every factory, the priority of every industry, the pay scale for every single worker.
And parliaments just can't do that. They become what he called talking shops.
Precisely. It's impossible for any democratic assembly to create a single, comprehensive, internally consistent economic plan.
They can argue about bits and pieces of it.
Right. They can criticize Sector C or debate the budget for Sector Q, but the plan is all interconnected. You can't change one part without creating chaos everywhere else, so they can't agree on a workable alternative.
And that leads to this profound disappointment with the slow, messy democratic process.
And that's when people start demanding that these decisions be taken out of politics and given to experts who could just get things done.
This is the characteristic stage he talks about, the rise of the dictator.
The cry for an economic dictator is the inevitable result. He was pointing to his contemporaries in the UK, people like Sir Stafford Cripps, and even the fascist Sir Oswald Mosley, and saying, look, they come from different political traditions, but they share this impatience with democracy's inefficiency when you're trying to impose a single will.
But hang on, if democracy still gets to vote for this dictator, isn't there still some kind of ultimate control?
He says that control becomes an illusion. It leads to what he calls a plebiscitarian dictatorship.
Okay, what does that mean?
The Democratic Assembly loses the ability to actually direct the plan because they can never agree on a workable alternative to the dictator's blueprint. The only real power they have left is to vote yes or no on the current leader.
But that vote is effectively meaningless.
Because the leader controls the economy, the information, the means of coercion. They have all the tools necessary to ensure the popular vote confirms their rule. The people's role is reduced to just choosing the person who wields absolute power, not directing how that power is used.
And every economic decision becomes a political decision about who gets what, about people's destiny.
That's the end game.
This transition leads us into what might be Hayek's most chilling analysis, this moral transformation of society under a planned system.
Yes.
He argues that the very framework of totalitarianism actively selects for the most ruthless people, that it ensures the worst moral characters end up on top. It's not bad luck, it's systemic.
This section, Why the Worst Get on Top, is just a psychological and political masterpiece. He's saying, look, to enforce a single comprehensive plan, the leadership needs absolute unreserved support from a very organized, very uniform core group.
A group willing to break the normal moral rules.
A group that is willing to do what's necessary.
So how does the system make sure the good guys get weeded out?
It happens through three, what you might call negative selection mechanisms. The first one is the lowest common denominator.
Okay.
As societies get more advanced and people get more educated and independent, their views and tastes get more different, more complex.
And complex views make it harder to get a group to agree on anything.
Exactly. So to find the largest possible group that is strong enough to impose its values on everyone else, group you can rely on for unified, unquestioning action, you have to descend to the regions of lower moral and intellectual standards.
You have to appeal to the more primitive common instincts, simple, emotionally charged ideas.
It's the only place you'll find that level of uniformity. So the ruling core will naturally be made up of the least original and independent minds. The real thinkers are just too varied, too nuanced. They're too likely to question the grand plan.
Okay, so that's the first mechanism. What's the second?
The second is the appeal to the docile. The leader needs more than just a core group with primitive instincts. They need numbers, and they need obedience.
And they attract the docile and gullible.
People whose own ideas are kind of vague, imperfectly formed, and who are actually eager to get rid of the burden of making their own decisions. They're ready to accept a pre-packaged system of values as long as it's drummed into their ears sufficiently loudly and frequently.
And the system itself rewards that kind of compliance.
Absolutely. In a planned economy, how do you get promoted? It's not based on your independent expertise or your ability to innovate. It's based on your loyalty to the plan, your willingness to be an obedient, cooperative cog in this huge machine. The system selects for conformity, not competence.
And the third mechanism is the easiest way to unify people, the power of the negative.
It is psychologically so much easier to unite a huge group of people on a negative program than on any positive, constructive task.
You rally people around a shared hatred.
A shared hatred of a designated enemy.
The Jew, the kulak, the capitalist.
The foreigner. It becomes an indispensable requisite in the totalitarian playbook. This enemy, whether real or manufactured, simplifies all the complex problems into simple blame, and it justifies using any amount of arbitrary power in the name of self-defense against this threat.
And all of this institutional need for ruthlessness, it leads to the core ethical transformation he talks about. The end justifies the means.
This is the absolute break from liberal individualist thought.
How so?
Individualist ethics are deontological. That means the means themselves are judged. Certain acts, lying, stealing, torture, are just wrong, period. Regardless of the outcome you're hoping for, there are fixed moral guardrails.
But a collectivist system has to tear down those guardrails.
It has to. It makes the principle that the end justifies the means the supreme rule. And the reason is simple. If the good of the whole is the one and only criterion for what you should do, then by definition, nothing you do in service of that ultimate goal can possibly be immoral.
And that directly leads to the selection of the most unscrupulous people.
The system actively promotes the people who are ready and willing to abandon traditional morality. To be a useful assistant in a totalitarian state, you have to be prepared to actively break every moral rule he has ever known if the leader says it's necessary.
Jobs like the Gestapo or in propaganda ministries.
They require cruelty, intimidation, deliberate deception. They're critical to making the state function, so it's a dark inversion. The very readiness to do bad things, to be unprincipled and capable of anything, becomes a direct path to promotion and power.
The conscientious person just can't compete.
They're paralyzed. They might agree with the goal, but they can't bring themselves to do what's necessary. They're inefficient, they quit, or they get pushed out. So the system selects against them. And the people who get to the top are the ones who just want power for its own sake. It's the mechanism, he says, not the individuals, that produces the moral monsters.
Okay, let's turn to this. This dangerous illusion that Hayek was so desperate to dispel, the idea that planning only affects the economic parts of life and that our real freedoms, political, personal, are left untouched.
Right. The idea that you can neatly separate life into compartments. There's the important stuff, family, faith, politics, and then there's the less important economic stuff over here.
But Hayek says that's a profound misunderstanding of what the economy even is.
There is no neat separation, because the economy provides the means for every single one of our important, unspecified ends.
He redefines that whole idea of the economic motive, so it's not just about greed.
Not at all. It's simply the desire for general opportunity, the desire for the power to achieve ends we haven't even specified yet.
I want enough income so I can decide later if I want to buy a plane ticket, or take a night class, or donate to a cause I care about.
You want options. This is why he says money is one of the greatest instruments of freedom ever invented by man. It's the widest possible set of choices generalized into one tool.
So what happens in a planned system if the state replaces money with specific rewards, like guaranteed housing, guaranteed food, specific bus passes?
You lose that critical flexibility. Whoever fixes the reward, the planner, gets to determine not only its size, but the specific form it should be enjoyed in.
If they give you a food coupon and a library voucher, they've decided your priorities for you.
But if they give you cash, you get to decide if books or groceries are more important this month. Money is freedom, because it lets you keep your priorities secret and flexible.
This is perfectly illustrated by his point about where an economic loss actually falls. In a free market, if you take a hit, it only affects the margin.
Right. Let's say your income drops by 10%. You still have the freedom to decide which of your desires you consider least important.
You absorb the loss at the fringe of your needs. Maybe you eat out less, or you put off buying a new car.
The loss affects the least important of your goals because you're the one making the choice.
But in a planned system.
The planner controls all the resources, the means for all our ends. If the central authority decides that steel has to be allocated entirely to tanks and not to farm equipment, they aren't just making an economic call.
They're deciding that their priority, national defense, overrides your priority, which might be a better crop yield.
You lose the ability to decide what's marginal for you. So economic control, Hayek concludes, isn't control over a limited sector of life. It's control over the means for all our individual ends.
Let's talk about the planner's grip on consumption and production. Even if I can still technically spend my income, how is my life still controlled?
The authority directing the whole economic system becomes the most powerful monopolist you can possibly imagine. They have total power to decide what goods and services are even available, in what amounts, and how they're distributed. So even if they don't explicitly tell you, don't buy this, they can just make the things they disapprove of incredibly expensive or, just unavailable.
So if the authority wants to encourage, say, physical activity and discourage private art, they could make sports tickets cheap, but make specialized paint and canvases astronomically expensive.
Or just stop importing the pigments altogether.
Exactly. They control what you consume almost as effectively as if they were telling you how to spend every dollar just by manipulating supply.
And Hayek argues that maybe even more important than consumption is our choice of occupation.
Because our work so often determines where we live, who we spend our time with, our sense of self-worth.
In a free market, even with limited choices, you always have some degree of freedom.
Right. If I'm an eccentric, specialized glassblower, I might not get rich, but I can probably find a niche. Or I can make a sacrifice, take lower pay, just to pursue my trade. But what if the planner steps in to eliminate that messy competition, all in the name of fairness and guaranteed high wages? How does that affect the glassblower's freedom?
They lose their ability to escape. If the planning authority fixes a standard wage and decides who gets jobs based on some objective test of collective need,
the person with non-standard skills or an irregular temperament is out of luck.
They can't find that special arrangement anymore. They can't make a sacrifice to get a start. They're forced to conform to the planner's rigid standards. The individual just becomes a means to an end, forced into whatever mold is deemed most efficient for the social welfare.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the illusion of security. Hayek is clear here. He's not against all social safety nets.
No, not at all. He explicitly says that security against severe privation, a minimum standard of food, shelter, health, can and should be guaranteed outside the market system without endangering freedom. That's essential for human dignity.
The dangerous demand, then, is for security against market-driven changes in your income, security against failure or fluctuation.
That is the toxic demand. To guarantee a certain income for some people requires you to abolish the freedom of employment choice for everyone. Because if income is guaranteed, the planner must have the power to assign people to jobs, regardless of their preference, to make sure the work gets done.
And what happens when you grant that kind of security piecemeal to specific industries?
It makes everything worse for everyone else. When you use restrictions to guarantee adequate returns for one industry, it increases the insecurity and limits the opportunities for everybody outside that protected bubble.
Because if you guarantee one group a huge fixed slice of the pie, the share left for everyone else fluctuates that much more wildly.
That's it, exactly.
Right.
And this is how the system sets the stage for people to demand security at the price of liberty. When the market is choked off by all these protections for powerful sectors, the unprotected person faces even more insecurity, and they're led to believe that only more planning can save them.
They trade their liberty for what looks like stability, not realizing the instability was created by the previous piecemeal planning in the first place.
It's a vicious cycle.
So Hayek also spent a lot of time debunking the common arguments people use to justify central control. The first, and maybe the most persistent one, is this myth of technological inevitability.
Right. The idea that the modern world is just so complex now that it demands central planning.
That competition is this crude, outdated method, and only a central computer can coordinate our complex supply chains.
And Hayek just flips this completely on its head.
He says that very complexity is the reason competition is the only solution.
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? Complexity makes competition the only way to achieve coordination because all the relevant information, the specific knowledge about local shortages, consumer desires, the efficiency of a certain machine, it's scattered across millions of people.
No one person, no single committee, no supercomputer can possibly gain a synoptic view of all those facts in real time.
It's impossible. He says central direction is incredibly clumsy, primitive, and limited in scope compared to the decentralized price mechanism,
which automatically registers the effects of millions of decisions instantly.
He argues that if we had tried to consciously plan the Industrial Revolution, it would have been stillborn. It never would have reached the level of differentiation and flexibility it did, precisely because it relied on that spontaneous, decentralized order.
So new technology, new power, it gives us choices. But we aren't forced to use that power to destroy our own liberty.
That's the key. He warns against this contemporary obscurantism that insists that historical trends are inevitable. He says we have to have the intellectual courage to admit that freedom comes at a price.
And sometimes that price is sacrificing a potential short-term gain that might come from a highly focused central plan,
in order to preserve the much greater long-term stimulus that comes from variety, decentralization, the unpredictable free growth of the market.
The second myth he tackles is what you could call the specialist's hubris.
Ah, yes. The single-minded idealist. The person who knows absolutely everything about one specific area and nothing about the wider problem of coordination.
Every specialist, the road builder, the public health official, the housing architect, they all champion planning because they believe their one specific ideal could be realized so quickly and perfectly if only it were made the sole aim of all humanity.
The expert on housing sees a housing shortage and thinks, if only I could control all the labor, all the steel, and all the financing, I could build beautiful, affordable housing for everyone right now.
They have this acute tunnel vision.
They absolutely do. The specialist fails to see that every single one of these ideals, building perfect roads, clearing every slum, maximizing energy efficiency, can only be achieved by sacrificing other things.
The road builder's perfect road might mean destroying valuable farmland.
The affordable housing advocate's plan might mean crippling investment in other vital industries. Planning is so often fueled by the resentment of the frustrated specialist who just sees things left undone that seem so desirable and possible.
And they don't see the cost.
They fail to realize those things can only be done at the cost of sacrificing other equally desirable things. Hayek said, if the most eminent specialists in each field were allowed to proceed unchecked, the result would be a highly irrational and unbearable world.
Because they'd all be maximizing their own specific goal while ignoring the colossal costs they impose on everyone else.
So the economist's argument is really an argument for modesty, for a method, the market which achieves coordination without needing an omniscient dictator to run the show.
That was an exhaustive deep dive into Hayek's architecture of warning. It's a compelling and often pretty frightening blueprint of how institutions can select for certain outcomes regardless of the good intentions of the people inside them.
It really is. And to synthesize this enormous work for our listener, maybe we should quickly reiterate the 3 core warnings.
Good idea. The first one is that good intentions must be constrained by rules, otherwise they lead inevitably to arbitrary power. That attempt to direct the economy by discretion just destroys the predictability of the rule of law. Second, the centralized promotion funnel selects for the most unscrupulous people. The institutional needs of totalitarianism, the demand for unified action, the need for coercion, the idea that the end justifies the means, it all inevitably raises the ruthless and the obedient to the very top.
And third, without freedom of economic action, long-term political liberty is impossible. Economic control isn't just control over one limited sector. It is control over the means for all our individual ends. It makes the planner the ultimate judge of all personal values.
So now let's try to make this actionable. When you, the learner, are looking at any new policy proposal, especially one that claims it's going to fix some market failure, Hayek gives us a really good 3-question checklist to see if it's heading toward liberty or servitude.
Okay, question 1. Is this policy designed merely to guide market forces, like with general rules, anti-monopoly laws, environmental limits, or is it directly intended to substitute for, to replace prices and competition? Things like setting specific output quotas, fixing prices, or allocating resources. That second one is the mechanism of planning. Question 2. What unintended consequences, shortages, distortions, perverse incentives might this first step create, forcing future rounds of secondary intervention? Hayek really teaches us to trace that mandatory chain reaction of coercion and rationing before you even take the first step.
And finally, question 3. Does the policy rely on first, impartial, transparent rules, the bedrock of the rule of law, or does it give some authority wide discretion and the power to make arbitrary decisions that affect particular people? If you see that kind of vague discretionary language, you're sacrificing the fundamental predictability you need for freedom.
At the end of the day, Hayek's final message is really one of intellectual humility. It requires us to abandon the belief that just because we have tremendous power, we must use it to centrally orchestrate all of society.
His challenge is still incredibly provocative today. He suggests that the greatest impediment to progress is this contemporary belief that whatever we've done in the past was either wise or inevitable.
We have to cultivate the intellectual courage to admit that pursuing certain cherished ideals can produce results that are utterly different from those which we expected.
And we have to relearn that freedom can only be had at a price that often requires us to sacrifice a possible immediate material gain to preserve the conditions for long-term progress.
He concludes with this really powerful thought for you to carry forward. We shall not grow wiser before we learn that much that we have done was very foolish.